Welcome everyone to another edition of From the Woods Today. I'm Renee Williams. I'm here with my co-host Billy Thomas, and we both work in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky. And welcome. We appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, no doubt. It's great to have you all with us. What an exciting show we have today, Renee. We're talking about an iconic species that's really kind of been decimated for many years. And there's so many efforts to try to restore the American chestnut. So we're going to have a professor, a new guest on from Eastern Kentucky University, Dr. Jen Koslow. She's going to be talking about some of the work that they're doing, along with Dr. Ellen Crocker, who's also engaged with that. They're both kind of representing the, at this way, at least the Kentucky chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation. So that's good. And then we're going to be talking about mushrooms. And then the tree of the week.
Yes. So we've got a slam pack show again for you today. We try to do that every week, get a little bit of variety in our topics. But first of all, I think at the beginning, we're going to kind of show a little video about American chestnut.
Yeah, we'll get started with that. And just a gentle reminder, so if you do have questions, you can pop them into our chat pod. And if you're watching via Facebook Live, welcome, and just put comments in the comment section there, and we'll try to address those best we can. So, all right, Renee, I'm going to go ahead and stop my stuff, and then we can get that video rolling of Rex Mann. And I guess before I do that real quick, so you're going to see a short clip of a TED Talk that Rex Mann did. Rex was retired from the U.S. Forest Service, but he was also a founding member of the American Chestnut Foundation chapter here in Kentucky, an all-around great guy, and he's done a lot not only for forestry but for the American chestnut. I've had a chance to meet Rex and work with him on a few different events, so this is a really kind of a powerful few minutes we're going to show, and then we'll get in with Jen and Dr. Crocker on that.
December 1983 in the North Carolina mountains. The sun's gone down, a cold wind makes you button up your coat and move closer to the campfire. My 2 young sons and 3 nephews are circled around that fire, smelling the wood smoke, listening to the fire pop. All eyes are fixed on my dad, Howard Mann. He's a mountain of a man in his old brown hunting coat, overalls, flannel shirt, black logging boots. He's telling about a way of life that existed in those mountains for 200 years, closely tied to this tree, the American chestnut. He's talking with great passion about what the tree meant to his people, its huge size, the wonderful wood used for everything, from cradles to coffins, and the never-failing crops of chestnuts that nurtured the mountain people, their livestock, and abundant wildlife that they depended on. Then his voice changed, and in a sad tone, he told how in 1904, chestnuts began to die from a strange disease, a blight. In just 40 years, all 4 billion American chestnuts were dead. Laid end to end, 4 billion trees would circle the globe 1.5 times. As I stood behind that circle of kids, I saw something no one else saw. A tear sliding down his wrinkled old face. I'd never seen my dad cry before, even when suffering agonizing pain or grief. Everything changed for me in that moment. I'd heard chestnut stories all my life, but it hit me. This tree wasn't just the foundation of an amazing ecosystem stretching from Maine to Georgia. It was the foundation of a culture, a way of life, now gone forever. Loss of the chestnut was an American tragedy, described by ecologists as the worst environmental disaster ever to strike our country. But this disaster could help save our forests. It was a warning shot across the bow, foreshadowing the fate of many more tree species yet to come if we do nothing.
That was a great introduction of that. He is such a great storyteller, and this is actually a true story of his life. And I've always loved hearing this. I've heard it in person, and then now this. But Ellen, tell us a little bit about the American chestnut. And I know we have Dr. Jen Koslow. She is the vice president of the Kentucky chapter of the American chestnut, and she'll be speaking to us a little bit on that as well.
Great. So I know I talked just a few weeks ago, a little bit of background on the American chestnut. And I, certainly can't follow Rex with his, deep emotional connection to that tree, because I think there are two sides of the loss of American chestnut. They used to be 1 out of every 4 trees in the Southern Appalachians. And not only did we lose something that was really important for people's lives, economically, for subsistence and this food source, but this key stone species in a lot of those forests that I think our woods are still filling the absence of. But I think that towards the end of his talk, he mentions that, and we just showed you a short little clip. So if you want to see more, please check it out online. But we can, it's not the end. And there's lots of fantastic research that's happening right now to try to restore American chestnut in our forests and woodland settings. And there's a lot we can learn from chestnut that we can apply to other invasive issues that are coming in and wiping out trees, whether that's emerald ash borer or hemlock woolly adelgid. So I want to invite Dr. Koslow to turn her video and unmute herself. And she can tell you about some of the work that the Kentucky chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation is doing, and some of the great work that she's doing at Eastern Kentucky University with chestnut.
Thank you, Ellen. I think I'll also share my screen in just a moment.
Wonderful. Well, I know that there's a lot happening with chestnut, and a lot of people I talk to are surprised that chestnut is still around, and you've got a lot of it there at EKU, right?
We do. So I really love, I always feel Rex's passion. I came to working with chestnuts in a different way through my research, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the American Chestnut Foundation and some of their aims, and just emphasize how ambitious what they're trying to do is. You can see here their mission is to return this chestnut to its native range, but let's just take a quick look at that range, right? This is a coordinated effort among the way the American Chestnut Foundation works is they have kind of a national office in Asheville, North Carolina, but they also have different chapters in almost all of the states in which chestnut was native. And if you think about trying to restore a species across this huge range, I mean, just thinking about the climate differing and all the different kind of neighbors that the tree might have in different forests, you can start to understand how ambitious the effort is. So not only are they trying to get a species back from functional extinction, but they're doing it on a huge scale. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about their 3 aims. They call it the 3 burr strategy, which is pretty cute because they made a good PR move on their part. But they're really taking as many aims as possible to try to bring this tree back. So I will talk most about, and you probably hear the most about, their breeding efforts. And those started a long time ago. Organizations started, USDA, different researchers, decades and decades ago. And then they abandoned that. And then in I always forget, 83, I think, maybe 84, they came up with a plan to try to get the resistance that Chinese chestnuts has to the blight into the American chestnut. And that's when their American Chestnut Foundation's breeding program began. And its goal is to get the resistance to the blight into a tree that matches the American chestnut's stature and fast growth in our native forests. Another approach that they take is biocontrol. So just like we're all on Zoom right now because of a virus, believe it or not, the blight fungus also gets a virus. And that virus on the blight slows down the blight and makes it easier for the trees to fight back. And this virus occurred spontaneously. It was discovered in Europe and in different parts of the US. And now people are working to find ways to make that virus more easily spread. Because one of the limits to that in the United States is that there are many different forms, different kind of genotypes, I guess, of the blight. And they need to match up in certain ways in order for the virus to be transmitted from one to the other. And so they're trying to figure out how to make that happen more easily, because otherwise I think it would be happening and would be helping out the chestnuts more naturally. And then the third thing, and I think you guys have heard a bit about that, is using a gene that is really common in a lot of plants. As I'm sure most of your viewers know, plants and fungi go way back, and some of those are great partnerships, and some of them are the fungus exploiting the plant. And so plants have many different ways to deal with that. And one of them is this gene that they specifically took from wheat, and that gene makes it so that the blight, even though it can still get into the trees, it isn't able to kind of destroy the tree and then absorb its nutrients in the way that it normally would. So those are the three approaches that the American Chestnut Foundation is taking, but you may be wanting to know more about the American chestnut in Kentucky and what we're doing with the chapter. And so I just wanted to highlight here that this is where American chestnuts naturally occurred in Kentucky. And you may notice that they were not common in the bluegrass region of Kentucky, and that's just because they tend to be in areas with sandy soil, well-drained soil. And so you can certainly, when you're out and about, find American chestnuts. They used to be these towering behemoths, and now usually what you'll find is something that looks almost like a shrub, because what happens is they get the blight and the main stem dies and then little sprouts come up. So that's the most common thing you'll see. But if you want to contribute to some of the efforts to helping the chestnut, you can use this app that people at UK, including Ellen, helped work and developing, called Tree Snap. And I think that's been featured before. And that's a great way where if you're out in the woods, you can collect the data. And then when you get back to a place with internet connection, it will get uploaded. One caution I have for you is if you find a giant chestnut, it's very likely, especially if it's in someone's yard or in a cemetery, a park, it's very likely that it's a Chinese chestnut. So there are many species of chestnuts across the world. And I very quickly want to show a couple of differences that might help you sort it out. But I will tell you, it can be tricky to tell them from each other. One thing to look at is the base of the leaves. This one is an American chestnut, and you can see how there's a symmetrical taper at the base of the leaf to the blade, to the petiole. But here it's asymmetrical, and there's less of a taper. You can see how it's kind of more blunt. And then another really important difference is not necessarily the size of the leaves, but the ratio of the length of the leaf to the width of the leaf. And you can see that American chestnuts tend to have longer and more narrow leaves. and the Chinese chestnut tends to have a shorter and wider leaf. Another thing is on the underside of Chinese chestnuts, they're fuzzy with white hairs. So those are some tips. Another thing to look out for, and the reason that Chinese chestnuts don't do well in our forest is that they tend to branch really low instead of having this upright form. And that means they don't do well in the understory. Whereas American chestnuts, when they get that light gap, they can just shoot up and start growing. As Ellen mentioned, we have an orchard on EKU's campus. This is what it looked like before we started. And this is the first day that we started putting trees in. So we put about 1,200 trees in that day. And it's part of a regional breeding program for the American chestnut. And these are what we would call B2 F3s, which is pretty off-putting. But it basically means that it's about 15 out of 16 parts American chestnut and only 1 part Chinese chestnut. So we grow these at close spacing in the orchard, and then when they get of a sufficient size, we test them for blight. So here's just a few photos. Somebody had a drone, so we really capitalized on that. The orchard in this photo didn't quite have its fence up, so we were having some problems, but now we've got a nice big fence going to keep out the deer and turkeys and everybody else that seems to remember how delicious chestnuts are. And the orchard is in great shape, in part due to our steward, Amos Stone, who's in the chapter and also part of, well, he's just the one that's making it work. He's retired from U.S. Forest Service, so he has a lot of experience with that. And then this is just a photo of our latest work day. And you can see that there's a bunch of down chestnuts. And this is because we've already done our first round of selection in inoculating the trees with blight. And the ones that had the blight, we know aren't going further and aren't going to be used for restoration. So this is just an image showing some EKU graduate students and then some chapter members here this past October. So if you want to learn more about what the American Chestnut Foundation is up to specifically in Kentucky, you're welcome to email me. My email address is up there, or our chapter president, Ken Darnell. We also are posting a lot of what we're up to on a weekly basis to our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. And then if you want to dive into learning about the American chestnut, there is so much information on the American Chestnut Foundation's webpage. They do a great job about keeping people up to date. And they also have chestnut chats. So you can kind of watch videos, kind of like this segment, but one person at a time talking about some aspect of the science that they're engaged in. So I hope that helps you guys know what the chapter is up to and how you might be able to get involved.
Thank you so much for that presentation. We do greatly appreciate it. One thing I was wondering is, can you actually purchase chestnuts to plant in your yard, or if people wanted to plant them in their woods, can they do that?
So there are chestnuts available, and they are not the restoration, you know, the chestnuts, we're not ready yet with material that can go back out into the forest and survive on its own. But if you want to have a chestnut in your yard, you can really literally just search on Google and find, you know, if you want it, especially for nut production, those are available. So that's something that people can get involved with. But we're still kind of at the stage where we're not quite ready. The American Chestnut Foundation has some nuts that seem like they're going to work. And they come, you know, they produce them every year. And so people who are, well, basically really involved or have big donations are able to get first access to those, which makes sense.
Right. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat pod. One is diversity required with a chestnut farm, or can all the seeds be planted next to each other to survive and be healthy?
Okay, that's a great question. And that's why I probably didn't explain it very well. We're very interested in having people find the pure American chestnuts, because that provides more diversity to go into the breeding program. So the chestnuts that are in the orchard come from a few different lineages. They've been bred carefully, but they aren't, they have diversity, but we always want more because with the chestnuts being across such a huge range, you can imagine that they're adapted to different climates in different places. And that's one reason we really need to make sure we capture some of that native diversity that's still around.
And Ellen, did you have a question?
Oh, I was going to comment that if people want to grow chestnut themselves, there's not a good source for American chestnut that are going to not be killed by the blight. As Dr. Kozlow said, we're just not there yet with that research and those programs. There have been great advances made, but you can't reliably purchase or get things that aren't going to get the blight and eventually kind of be killed off, at least the branches. But there is Chinese chestnut and some other chestnuts that you could purchase if you're really interested in nut production and you want to have a great tree. It's never going to become a big, tall forest tree. It's going to have a different form, but that's one option. And then I see that there was a question. Someone has some American chestnuts sprouting up in their land and trying to figure out, where do you go from there? So the first thing I'd say is definitely report them with the Tree Snap app. And that way the different folks with the American Chestnut Foundation can look at them and try to determine if they can from photo. And it's tricky. You can't always do that. Is it Chinese? Is it American? And if it is American, I think just adding that to the database of the ones that are out there for potential diversity in the future. The other thing that I'd say is that if it is American, it's probably gonna, those shoots are gonna eventually be killed by the blight, but that tree might not be killed, it might just send up new sprouts and new shoots. And you can do various things to promote its health, from increasing its access to light and, just trying to get it to thrive as much as possible. So it will put on a lot of growth and you might even get some nut production from it.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ellen, we have a practice we call crop tree management, and it would be perfect for the chestnut. But basically, you're freeing up competition around it and giving it more access to resources to help it out.
I would throw in too, the blight does not survive the underground environment. And so there's actually, if you want to look into it, if there's a tree a particular tree that you want to save, this isn't going to work on scale, but you can use a technique called mud packing. You literally make a paste of mud and put that on the canker. And that can help, but again, it's not a thing that people can use on large scale. So, but if it's a tree that you love for some reason, it's worth a try.
Yeah. Well, Jen, I would say a lot of people love these chestnuts. I know that, I'm having the opportunity to work with Kentucky's woodland owners. I know that's a common thing that people ask about often. So, yeah, really great. And I'm just glad to hear that you and Dr. Crocker now kind of have some leadership roles in helping the chestnut here in Kentucky. So it's awesome. Thank you.
And I just really want to thank you guys for having me on this show. It's really exciting. And actually congratulate you on such a successful pivot in a weird time. To be having a weekly show to keep in touch with people is really a great idea.
Well, thank you. We'll have to get you back again. I'm sure you've got a lot of expertise you can share with our audience. So we appreciate you very much.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on, we have our next segment, which is on mushrooms.
No, we get to keep Dr. Crocker around for a little bit longer. Ellen, we get so many questions about mushrooms. Oh my.
Yeah, can I eat them? What should I do? Can I find them in the forest? Should I just wait and buy them in the grocery? What's the best thing to do?
I know, and this is the time when they're all popping up, especially these past few months in the fall. They are popping up everywhere, especially in your woods. So myself and Megan Bueland, who's a forest health technician with me here at UK, are going to take you on a virtual kind of hike with us to look at some of the common mushrooms we've been seeing popping up. kind of in the summer and fall time. So we're just going to cherry pick a few of those and give you a little introduction to those mushrooms. What do they look like? How do we know it's those mushrooms and not something else? And then after that video, we're just going to chat with you about mushrooms and whatever your questions are.
Yeah, so get your mushroom questions ready. And Megan and Ellen, thanks for doing this. And Renee, if okay, I'll go ahead and share it.
Welcome. It's fall, so you're probably seeing lots of mushrooms popping up in the woods. I bet you're curious about what those species are and what they're doing in the environment. So today you're going to join us on a little virtual hike to talk about some of the common mushrooms you might be seeing, how to identify them, and what they're doing.
These are chanterelles. They belong to the group Chanterellus. There are several different genera within this group, but we'll just call them chanterelles for the sake of simplicity. All chanterelles are going to have a few characteristics in common. They're mycorrhizal. That's why you'll almost always find chanterelles occurring in groups. You'll very rarely find one chanterelle alone. So even if the others are hidden under the leaf litter, it's a good chance that where you find one, there are more nearby. Chanterelles almost all have either a orange or reddish orange cap. There are a couple exceptions within this group that come in different colors. They'll be lighter in color. There's one species that is very dark, almost black, but most chanterelles are going to be orange. Those chanterelles tend to grow in groups. They don't grow in clusters. And this is an important diagnostic feature to distinguish them from another species of fungus that at first glance can often look deceptively like chanterelles. Jack-o'-lantern fungi look very similar to chanterelles, but they tend to grow in true clusters, usually from a piece of rotten wood or from the decaying base of a tree. And jack-o'-lantern fungi are poisonous and should never be confused with chanterelles. So that's an important distinguishing character to keep in mind, that those chanterelles tend to grow in groups and not growing together in clusters. Chanterelles don't have true gills like most fungi do. They have veins instead, which can look a little bit like gills, but are not quite as distinct. So if you look at the underside, you'll see these ridged, forked veins that occur on the underside of the cap, and these are very characteristic of chanterelles. Usually these veins will fork near the edges of the cap as well, which is another helpful ID key for these fungi. Chanterelles, when you break them apart, will always be white on the inside of the mushroom, as opposed to the jack-o'-lantern fungi that we talked about, which when cut in half will be orange all the way through. Another helpful feature to distinguish these two groups from each other. This is Laetoporus sulphurus. It's also often called the chicken of the woods fungus. It is a mushroom commonly found here in eastern North America, growing as either a parasite or a saprophyte on hardwood trees. We have two species of Laetoporus that are common in our area. These are polypores, so they have pores on the undersurface of the fruiting body rather than gills or teeth or any other kind of structure. And it's from those pores that the basidiospores are released. Laetoporus sulphurus is going to have a bright orange top surface to the fungus, to the fruiting body, and the underside where the pores and the spores are produced is going to be a sulfur yellow color. We also have another species of Laetoporus common in our region that is known as Laetoporus cincinnatus, and that species will also have an orange top surface, but the underside is going to be a very creamy, pale color. This species is found fruiting from early summer up until the end of summer, early fall, and it is a parasite or a saprophyte. As a parasite, it is feeding on living hardwood trees in the heartwood and taking nutrients from the tree itself. As a saprophyte, it's growing on bedwood and consuming the nutrients from a tree that is no longer living. This is a hericium mushroom. This is a very small specimen. They can get to be fairly good sized. I've seen some that are a little bit smaller than basketball sized on occasion. There are several different species within the genus of Hericium, and they can be sometimes a little difficult to tell apart, especially when they're smaller like this. But they're a really lovely group of mushrooms. They're sometimes called pom-pom mushrooms or lion's mane mushrooms. And Hericium are toothed fungi, so rather than gills or pores, they have these little teeth that look kind of like icicles that hang down off of the fruiting body of the fungus, and that's where the basidiospores would be produced. This guy's a little small yet. They are always white when they're fresh. As they get a little bit past maturity, they can take on a little bit of a yellow coloration to them, but younger specimens and fresh specimens are always going to be a nice white color. Sometimes they're completely round pom-poms like this. Sometimes they're branched and they look kind of more like icicle or coral structures. It just depends on the species of Hericium that you're looking at. They also have a very distinctive aroma. It's kind of sweet, slightly pungent, and a little bit difficult to describe, but once you've smelled it, you'll definitely associate that distinctive smell with Hericium fungi. They can be parasites or saprophytes, so they can either grow on decaying wood or they can grow on living trees as a parasite. It just depends upon the situation that you're in. Here in the east, we usually find them on hardwood trees. Occasionally out west, you'll see them growing on conifers, but like I said, in our area, almost always hardwood trees for the little Hericium fungi. These are hedgehog fungi. In the genus Hydnum, hedgehog fungi are a group of mushrooms. They have teeth on the undersurface of the cap, so no gills, no pores. There are several species of Hydnum fungi here in the southeastern US, and we are holding 2 of them here today. You can see the great size difference between these 2 mushrooms. One is larger than my hand and the other is a very small mushroom, but they're both in the genus Hydnum and they are both hedgehog mushrooms. These fungi are mycorrhizal. They grow in association with the roots of conifers or hardwood trees, depending upon the species of Hydnum that you're looking at. They are found throughout the US, but the species that grow on the West Coast are different than the East Coast species that we have here. They're characterized by a tan to buff top to the mushroom, and they're very unremarkable when you see them from the top surface. They just look like a little lumpy gray mushroom or brown mushroom, but when you turn them over, you'll see the very, very distinctive teeth on the underside of the cap. They do have a stalk. It is off-center from the cap of the mushroom and runs down into the soil that the mushroom is fruiting out of. Fungi could play a lot of really diverse roles in the ecosystem around us, from the good to the bad, and from the delicious to the deadly. If you would like to learn more about fungi and mushrooms here in Kentucky, visit Kentucky Forestry Extension to find plenty of fascinating resources on mushrooms and fungi in the world around us.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. And, you know, I've always wondered, you know, when settlers were coming here and they happen to look down and, you know, in their woods and go, yeah, maybe I should eat that. It just makes you wonder, because some of those pictures don't look very appetizing, but others look pretty good. You know, so.
Yeah, and I think, you know, mushrooms get a bad rap because, you know, people have been eating these species for thousands of years, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of local knowledge about them, and most mushrooms, you know, might not be palatable, might not be good things to eat, but they're not poisonous. However, there are a few that can make you pretty sick. You'll really regret eating them. And then there's a handful that can kill you, even if you eat a few bites. So with that being said, you know, you really don't want to mess that up. And I think, you know, a lot of people are rightfully really nervous about mushrooms. And I think you should be a little bit nervous about them, but there's also a lot there and a lot of great species. And as employees of the University of Kentucky, we're not going to tell you what you can and can't eat, but we can hopefully help guide you on your learning process, you know, what different species are, what to look for, and where to go for more information.
So I know you find a lot of mushrooms in the fall, but are there winter mushrooms as well?
What do you think, Megan? Megan is an avid mushroom hunter and also mushroom grower. So we've been having lots of fun together out in the woods this summer and fall. But I think a lot of people have this misconception that winter is going to come and there's not going to be any mushrooms.
No, not really. You know, winter is one of my favorite times to get out in the woods and look for mushrooms, actually. And part of the reason for that is that there's not a lot else going on. So you can really see some of the mushrooms that are fruiting during the winter time. And sometimes they have surprisingly bright colors or distinctive features that you can look for. So some of the hericium mushrooms were far enough south that they will fruit up and through like December or January. There's a lot of polypore fungi and bracket type fungi, so fungi that grow on trees or on decaying wood, that are more likely to be found fruiting in the fall and in the early winter. So just because, you know, it's wintertime doesn't mean that all of your mushroom hunting fun is over. You're not going to find chanterelles or morels, but you will find a lot of really interesting fungi fruiting that time of year as well.
I actually think that if you've got kids or working with youth, you know, you can still find them in the winter, and they might be older and they might be old kind of stiff bracket fungi that are sitting around, but at a time of year when you might not be able to find some other things, you'll still be able to find fungi. They'll still be there. And as Megan mentioned earlier, you don't have to worry about some pesky things like ticks and poison ivy quite as much as you do during the summertime.
No doubt. You know, Ellen and Megan, one of our great landowners that we've had actually on the show before, Jack Stickney, you know, he's an avid mushroom producer down in Estill County and an outstanding woodland owner and former tree farmer of the year. But, you know, he makes the argument that Kentucky could really be kind of the mushroom capital of the world just because of where we're positioned, you know. So thank you all for kind of highlighting the value of mushrooms and how important they are. It's really cool.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree, both from cultivating mushrooms to wild foraging them. And I think there's a lot of potential there. If anybody is interested in learning more about wild foraging their own mushrooms, though, I'd really encourage them to be careful and, you know, do due diligence first. You know, I have a few basic foraging tips for folks. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I want to emphasize that there's no simple test for what's going to be poisonous and not. Unfortunately, you know, none of the kind of things that we might have heard growing up, like if it's white or if you boil it with a penny and it turns, you know, like none of that works, unfortunately, because there's so many different mushrooms and there are so many different toxins that they can potentially produce. So really what you need to do is you need to identify the species with 100% confidence. You want to be completely certain that what you're eating is what you think it is and not something else. So you don't want any wiggle room there. You don't want, oh, it kind of looks like this picture. You need to be 100% certain. So with that, I recommend you start with some easy species. Don't just pick something and think, can I eat this? You know, that's a tough road because some mushrooms are really difficult to identify species. You might need a microscope. You might need, I mean, some of them you need DNA-based identity to be certain. But there are some species that are really easy to ID, really easy to distinguish with potential lookalikes. So start with those instead of just trying to pick whatever you find. Be really aware that different people can have allergies to different mushrooms, and those mushrooms might have interactions with the drugs you're taking. So there are some mushrooms that are fine unless you drink them with alcohol, and then you will get really sick. There are some mushrooms that might be fine for one person to eat, but if you eat them, you know, you might have an allergy to that. You might get a lot of GI distress. And then how those are prepared are really important because most mushrooms need to be cooked. And if they aren't, you can get very sick. Even mushrooms that are perfectly edible and people eat them all the time. Morels are a good example. People love morels, but you can get quite ill from those if they're not cooked properly. So in addition to cooking them properly, store them properly, because the way that most people get sick eating mushrooms is that they stored their mushrooms improperly and then they rotted or got contaminated with something that then made them sick. And if you are sick, don't contact me. Don't contact strangers on the internet. Contact a medical professional because while most mushrooms aren't poisonous and there's only a handful of really deadly ones. Those are very deadly. So even a few bites can kill you. And so you do need to really take that seriously. So if you're interested in learning more, there's some great resources. I recommend you check out free websites like mushroomexpert.com. If you're on Facebook, there's a Bluegrass Mycological Society that you can join, post pictures, see what other people are finding, and learn more. And we've got a publication out entitled Don't Eat Those Wild Mushrooms Unless You Know What You're Doing, that goes through some of the tips that I mentioned today. What are some of the common reasons why people get sick when they're eating mushrooms, and how to avoid that, how to get started on that journey of mushroom foraging without putting yourself or your family at risk.
Thank you. We greatly appreciate that, because I know a lot of people probably question whether they should eat it or not. And I know if it was me, I would just be like, no, I better not, just keep on walking.
Oh, and I think that's the best thing to do. And I really advocate that people, mushroom hunt for fun, not for food, because it's really fun, to go out in the woods and see all these beautiful mushrooms and take pictures of them and try to figure out what they are. And you can always go to the grocery store and buy mushrooms. I mean, no mushroom is worth even worrying about, much less getting sick over. So I really encourage people, instead of picking mushrooms and immediately thinking, can I eat this or not? Don't do that. Immediately think like, how cool, what a beautiful mushroom. I wonder what it is. And use some of the local expertise to figure that out instead of eating it. Stick with those that you know.
We did have a question of someone wanting to know if they can hire someone to locate and identify edible mushrooms.
There are some individuals in the state that do sell services for mushroom foraging and some of that expertise, as well as out of the state. Now, the state of Kentucky does not approve sale of wild foraged mushrooms. So it's a little different than some other states that have more robust systems with that. While you can certainly forage them as long as you're in a place where it's legal to forage them. So like a federal land or your private property that you have permission to be on. There are many places where you can't forage in Kentucky, like our state nature preserves or parks. And so you want to be really clear about that. And, there's not as robust of a system in place for mushroom foraging and identification as in some other places. But I really recommend you reach out to that local expertise that is there for mushroom hunting to kind of help you on your journey. And there's nothing better than going mushroom hunting with somebody who really knows their stuff and can guide you in that process. Megan, do you have any other tips for folks just getting started or interested in learning more?
Invest in a good ID book. There are a lot of really nice ID books out there that do well for the southeastern US. Some of them are a little bulkier than others, but there are some good guidebooks out there. And although a guidebook might not help you figure out the exact species that you're looking at in the woods, it's going to give you a lot of key features to look for to kind of point you in the right direction. So take a lot of pictures of a mushroom that you want to ID when you see it. Take pictures of the trees around it and what it looks like where it's growing. I always take pictures of the gills, and then use those pictures as well as any ID books and internet resources to identify your mushrooms later on.
And take everything you read on the internet with a grain of salt. If you post a photo in a group, what is this and can I eat it? They might have great information and they might have some not great information. So never put your lives in the hands of strangers on the internet.
Great advice.
Great advice.
Yeah, no doubt. Oh, Megan and Ellen, not only are you helping to keep Kentucky's forests healthy, but you're also helping save lives by giving good guidance and advice. So thank you all so much for your contributions. And, Ellen, your forest health group and lab is just really impressive. So thanks for all you're doing.
Well, our pleasure to be on. Thank you for the invitation.
Awesome. Wow, Renee, really great segment so far,
Mm-hmm. And we have another one. It's our weekly tree of the week.
Yeah,
Laurie Thomas.
This is a prominent one. Hey, Laurie.
Yeah. Oh, you're muted. Okay.
There we go.
Here we go.
Yes, I was going to say this week is a tree that it's the American beech, and I thought it was a great one to do since I just like the tree. It's an easy tree to identify. It's lovely in all seasons, and I'll talk a little bit about that in here. And it's got edible fruit, edible seeds. So here's the American beech.
I'm Laurie Thomas with the University of Kentucky Forestry and Natural Resource Extension, and I'm here with the tree of the week, the American beech. American beech, Fagus grandifolia, is one of the most distinctive and common trees of the eastern deciduous forest. It is the only species in the genus Fagus in North America. American beech is a slow-growing, very shade-tolerant tree. It's a long-lived tree that can live up to 300 to 400 years. It is a medium to large tree that grows 70 to 100 feet tall and up to 3 feet in diameter. Grown in an open setting, the tree will have a short, stocky trunk and wide spreading crown, but in a forested setting, it will have a clear, straight, massive trunk and a much smaller crown. Common forest associates include sugar and red maple, yellow birch, basswood, black cherry, eastern white pine, hickories, and oaks. American beech is native to the eastern United States and common in Kentucky. It's the fourth most numerous tree in the state according to the U.S. Forest Service Forest Inventory Analysis. Although beech is now confined to the eastern United States, except for pockets in Mexico, it once extended as far west as California and probably flourished over most of North America before the last glacial period. American beech is found on a wide variety of soils, but generally grows best in moist, fertile sites. It reaches its greatest size in the alluvial soils of the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. American beech is a deciduous tree with alternately arranged leaves, as you can see in the photo. The leaves are simple in form, they're elliptical to oblong and pointed, and they're typically about 2.5 to 5.5 inches long. The leaves are pinnately veined, which is a type of venation pattern in which the secondary veins run parallel to each other from the midrib toward the edge of the leaf. Each vein ends in a sharp, distinct tooth at the leaf margin. The leaves are shiny green above and pale below, and the leaves are somewhat papery they feel sort of papery when you touch them. American beech is an attractive landscape tree for all seasons. It has a graceful spreading form. In early spring, the leaves emerge from buds as feathery tassels. In the summer, foliage is dense and green, and in the fall, it turns a lovely golden bronze. In winter, the tree's other notable attribute is emphasized, the smooth, thin, light gray bark. American beech is monoecious, which means trees will have both male and female flowers. The male flowers are on globe-like heads and hang in short, slender stalks. The female flowers are in shorter spikes in groups of 2 to 4. The flowers bloom just after the leaves emerge in the spring, and the flowers are wind-pollinated. The fruit is an edible nut that's enclosed in a woody husk that looks like a burr. The nuts are relatively small, about 1.5 to 3/4 inches long, and they're triangular in shape and shiny and brown. There's usually 2 nuts in a single burr, but occasionally you'll find 3. The nuts mature in one growing season, somewhere between September and November, and the seeds will begin to fall after the first heavy frost, which causes those burrs to open, and seed drop will be complete within a few weeks. Most of the seeds will drop near or right underneath the parent tree, or roll down a steep slope, so in general dispersal is somewhat limited. Occasionally rodents may carry seeds short distances, and blue jays may disperse those seeds further. Trees begin seed production around 40 years of age, with best production after 60 years. Good seed crops are produced at 2 to 8 year intervals, and seeds germinate the following spring. American beech nuts are an important wildlife food for a variety of birds and mammals. The nuts are eaten by mice, squirrels, chipmunks, black bear, deer, fox, ruffed grouse, ducks, and blue jays. It is one of the main nut producers in the northern hardwood forest. An American beech tends to hold on to its leaves longer than its forest associates, so it provides cover for birds in the winter. The bark is smooth and thin. It's light gray in color and resembles an elephant's hide. The bark doesn't change much as the tree ages and grows, and because the bark is thin, it is very vulnerable to damage from fire. American beechwood is typically a pale cream color, sometimes with a pink or a brown hue. Veneers tend to be slightly darker in color, as slicing the veneer usually requires the wood to be prepared with steam, which gives the wood a more golden tone. Flat sawn surfaces tend to be very plain, while quarter sawn surfaces exhibit a silvery fleck pattern. American beech wood is excellent for turning and steam bending. It's used for flooring, furniture, veneer, plywood, baskets, and even popsicle sticks. Smartwood USA in Corbin, Kentucky is one of the largest producers of food-grade wooden sticks, and they use locally sourced American beech. It is also used for charcoal and as a fuel wood due to its high density and good burning qualities. American beech is also tapped to make syrup, and the beech nuts are edible and used in foods. The national champion American beech is in New Kent, Virginia. It's 224 inches in circumference, 90 feet tall, with a 110-foot crown spread. The Kentucky champion is in Hart County. It's 164 inches in circumference, 143 feet tall, with a 100-foot crown spread. If you'd like to know more about champion trees, check out American Forest Champion Trees or check out the Kentucky Division of Forestry Champion Trees. Now for a few fun facts about American beech. Native cultures and early pioneers roasted and ate beech nuts. They also used them to make a coffee substitute. Pioneers used beech leaves to stuff their mattresses, and beech ashes were used to make soap. Passenger pigeons before their extinction were among those species that ate beech nuts. The pigeons were known to converge upon beech groves in such large numbers that their weight would frequently break large limbs. The scientific genus name Fagus is from the Greek phagein, which means to eat, in reference to the edible nuts, and the species name Grandifolia refers to the grand foliage. Thank you for joining me to learn about this native tree. I hope you get the opportunity to get out into your woodland, local park, or neighborhood and enjoy the attractive American beech.
Thank you for that presentation. And I'm noticing one thing with a lot of this, a lot of these trees are being used for substitutes for coffee. So I was like, this like everybody is wanting a substitute for coffee.
And that would be an old substitute. It's obviously not
Right.
a good substitute because it
Right.
obviously didn't carry on.
Right.
But it is edible, and that's one thing we don't think about. Sometimes a lot of our forest trees do produce seed, not all, but do produce some kind of seed that is edible. And with beech nuts, they are. And you can make, if you actually Google American beech nut recipes, you'll come up with several good ones out there. There's a beech nut pie that kind of reminds you of a derby pie. You're replacing those beech nuts kind of instead of those pecans. You want to make sure those nuts are cooked though first, because they do have a slight toxin in them, and if you ate many of them raw, it might upset you. Just roast them, like you do roasted nuts, roasted pumpkin seeds or something. You can do that with those. They call them nibblers. And you can even grind down the seeds and add it to cakes to make more of a nutty type of flour in your cake mix and stuff. But I know the pies, Tammy Rogers, who works with the Kentucky Division of Forestry, she always talks about in the fall, she's out collecting beech nuts because she makes beech nut pies for her family. So she said they're great. A lot of work, but great. So
Can you buy beech nuts anywhere, or is it just you have to go out in the forest and look for them?
that I don't know. I have no idea. And
Yeah.
maybe
I'm
if
not
somebody
sure.
else knows,
I don't think I've ever seen them in the store anywhere. That's why I was asking.
I know Tammy collects hers. She'll go out and actually collect them from a tree. So
Mhm. All right.
Maybe the advantage of being a woodland owner, Renee, you can
There you
collect
go.
exactly.
Plant a whole bunch of nut producing and fruit producing trees.
Great segment, Laurie. And I was glad to see you mention Smartwood. That's really kind of a cool success story. And, part of our team has worked with them. Chad Nyman and some others have worked with them to try to help them get going and stuff. So it's neat to see a resource, because a lot of times, beech may not be the most valuable wood that we have out there as far as from a timber standpoint, but it's good to see a good use for it.
Mhm.
Excellent. All right, man. Trees of the week are cool. Keep them up.
Keep them up, keep them going. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Laurie. Appreciate it. Renee, another one. Wow. Really heavy hitters today. Great. Having a Jen Coslow and Ellen Crocker, Megan Dooland, and Laurie Thomas. Thank you all so much for your great segments. If you're viewing via Facebook Live, thank you so much for being with us. If you have comments, please put them in the comment section. And for our folks via Zoom, thank you all for being with us as well.
Yeah. And Billy, you can always go to fromthewoodstoday.com and look for any of our shows. Believe it or not, Billy, we have almost 7 months of shows on that. on
I'm
that
telling
site.
you, there's some good content on there,
There
folks.
are.
Please help us spread the word about this. We really think a lot of folks out there would enjoy it. You may have family members or neighbors or others, so please help us spread the word. We want everybody to care about and learn more about Kentucky's woodlands and our wildlife that we have here in the state.
Exactly. All right. So that wraps up our show for today. So great. Thank you for joining us, and make sure you tune back in with us next Wednesday at 11 o'clock. And until then, take care.
Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.